That's the most elemental form of hope. It's not the hope that one is going to heaven or that one is elect by God. It is the hope of being alive tomorrow, and that tomorrow might be better than today. That's close to the featherless hope I'm talking about. Think about that. Now her title is interesting. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. It comes from a poem by Paul Laurence Dunbar, an African-American poet of the Harlem Renaissance, who talks about the cry of the bird in the cage to be free. A gesture toward slavery, but also toward those who are enslaved or entombed in other places, like the women I've mentioned all this fall, like Maya Angelou. And ironically enough, that leads me to my other story. In the lectionary today, if you were reading from yesterday, if you were reading in the Jewish sequence of readings, there is a passage about how Rachel, one of the two wives of Isaac, I believe, yes? Jacob, thank you. Finally gets pregnant. And she names her first son Joseph. We all know this story. At least you should know this story. You better know this story. That there's this fellow named Joseph, and no, he's not the husband of Mary. That's a whole other Joseph. I didn't get those two straight until I was in junior high. At any rate, Joseph, the son of Rachel. And what I didn't know until I looked at the text carefully is that Joseph is a pun. Virtually all the names in the Torah are puns. They're plays on words. Like Adam comes from the word Adamah, meaning earth, because Adam was made from the earth, you see. And Isaac is named Isaac, which means laughing boy, because Sarah, who bore him, laughed at the thought that she was going to get pregnant. And Joseph means another, meaning that she was desiring not to have one child, but two. Because in ancient times, one child is as good as no child because of illness and risk and danger. So every family wanted many children. Can you imagine mothers out there? You've just given birth, and you say, I want to do it all over again. Not so much. And yet, here is a kind of hope that we can almost begin to understand. If your only hope for the world is to create children, you want as many as you can, even if it causes you great pain. So that's another kind of hopelessness, to be reduced to wanting something that would be arduous, even dangerous to you, if it increased your chances of survival in a larger sense. And this leads me last to a story about Mary, the mother of Jesus, not found in the Christian scriptures, but found in the Quran. There's more stuff written about Mary in the Quran, by the way, than there is in the Christian Bible. And there's a passage there in which, being pregnant, she went off to give birth and found herself alone and could not find any water. And so she cries out to die because she is struggling with childbirth and has no water. She's literally at the end of her rope. And she gets a vision from God saying, tug on that date tree and its fruit will fall in your hands and you will be nourished. Now that doesn't appear, none of the actual birth events take place in the Christian scripture. We just know that she had a baby, and in this picture we have the picture of a Mary who is at the point of hopelessness, who has nothing that she believes she can even live for. She's caught in the throes of childbirth, she's dying of thirst, and only at that moment is she delivered both of her child and of her hopelessness and of her thirst. What I'm noticing about Maya Angelou, about Rachel, and about Mary, and if you look carefully in lots of stories of saints and people in Scripture, is that hope comes at the point of hopelessness, when there is so little left that you're even hoping to die, that would be a deliverance. We see this in the story of Hagar, who was put out of Abraham's camp to die in the desert, and she literally gives up hope, and then God gives them water. I want to talk about hopelessness as a spiritually powerful place that we all need to know, because I've had it all the time. And I want to tell you that what I found strugglesome on Wednesday was I was working with a young man, the gift of youth, who seemed in his face to have no sense of hopelessness at all. For him, the world was all admirably scripted out. It was very clear what would happen to whom and how it would turn out. The story was beautifully coherent and consistent, and he decided that as long as he lives inside that, he is fine. When I said on that show that faith has to have moments of doubt or it isn't real, he smiled incredulously. He couldn't imagine having faith and then doubting that same faith. Once one believes, there's never any point in doubting, is there? His hope, to use Dickinson's metaphor, was fully fledged, crowing, cocky even. My hope, my faith, is missing many feathers. So is yours. You know, what he's tell people that the trouble with being a liberal is that we're not even good at taking our own side in an argument. Because we are always willing to learn from another, but that's where the feathers get plucked off, you know what I mean? But I want to recommend the hopeless liberal as the paragon of hope, the one with the featherless hope, the one whose birds have shed and molted a little bit, who can't cry the beautiful sound, but yelp out that, let me out of this cage, I want to be whole kind of song. Many years ago, when my eldest was scarcely more than one, I was not a stay-at-home dad, but it was a take-him-to-work dad. I worked in a little church that had a nursery right next to my office, and I brought him in, and we put him in the little crib there, and he'd sleep, and I'd see someone in my office, and then we'd go. And then one day, it was cold, and I was trying to start up the car. We were in the car right outside the church office, and I tried to start the car, and it wouldn't start. And I looked under the hood, and the engine was aflame. And I tried to decide what to do. And the reality was there was only one thing I could do: take the child and flee. But I'm a male. I'm supposed to be able to fix these things. And I felt so useless in that moment. I was unable to put out the fire. It did not eventually explode. I called the fire department, and bless them, they came and put out my car fire, and I felt just awful about being inept and incompetent. And I'm telling you this story because every one of you has a moment somewhere in your life when you felt completely incompetent, completely useless, completely hopeless about yourself. And I want to point to that moment because it puts you in the same place as the Quranic Mary under the tree, or Hagar in the desert, or Maya Angelou in St. Louis. That this featherless hope is the prayer, Paul Lawrence Dunbar says, the prayer that he sends from his heart's deep core. You have not sent a prayer in reality until it is one of desperation. Those of you familiar with the recovery movement know that one of the key elements is realizing you are incompetent before the thing that has you. And the reaching out toward a higher power is not the admission that God is there, but the admission that you need help. You can't do it by yourself. In the tales of Scripture and stories everywhere, it is the broken-winged birds, the featherless birds, the caged birds that matter the most. Because not until you have lost hope can you be transformed. Ask anyone who's been to a recovery group. You have to be at the point of hopelessness to find real hope.